You hit every target and still feel invisible. If the only way to stay within this organization is to make yourself small, that isn't strategy. That's slowly disappearing. Today, we're separating identity from environment and turning hard work in the dark to calm, visible leadership with Sharon Ehrlich. We'll map out why effort doesn't equal recognition, how to reframe networking as generosity, and the difference between mentors and sponsors, the people who say your name in rooms when you're not in them. Stay with me till the end, and you'll leave with a 7-day visibility play that you can start today. Welcome to UnCeiling You, the podcast that helps mid-level professionals break through bias, self-doubt, and invisible ceilings with calm, confidence, and clear strategy, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Luke. Today's guest, Sharon Ehrlich, embodies what it means to lead with both strategy and soul. Sharon is an accomplished executive coach, public speaker, and corporate trainer with more than 30 years of corporate experience, including leadership roles at IBM, Citrix, and VM Software. Originally from New York City, Sharon has spent over 2 decades living in Vienna, Austria, giving her global presence on navigating identity, leadership, and belonging across cultures. She helps women redefine success, set boundaries, and align their careers with their values. Get ready to be inspired by Sharon's story and her wisdom on turning visibility into value and leadership into legacy. Sharon, welcome to UnCeiling You. Here's the unique thing about you. You grew up in public housing in the Bronx and then ultimately ended up leading boardrooms across the globe. And your story is extraordinary. What was the first bold action that you took that made you realize that you were stepping into something bigger than you could ever imagine?
The first big move I ever took was when I was at the tender age of 17 and having to make decisions about which universities I was going to apply to. And my school guidance counselor was encouraging me to apply to City College and to State College because they were local. I can only assume that she had a limited perspective on where students from this high school could go to university. And I took her advice, but then I did something more. I applied to 2 private universities and I was accepted to all of them. And then I made the decision to go to private school against the guidance of my guidance counselor. The reason that I took that decision was I thought that it was important for me to have a complete change in my environment. And had I gone to city school, I would have had to live at home, and I didn't want to do that. What happened and why this is such a big move is, part of my story is that I come from a family, a blue-collar working class family, economically challenged. Sometimes we had some food insecurity. Sometimes we had some housing insecurity. And so to make a decision to go to a school that I could hardly afford was a bold move. And what was even bigger about it was the fact that when I got to this university, I realized how poor I really was. Because, when you don't have and you live in a community where nobody has anything, that's the norm. And then I moved into this whole other world. And I'm not exaggerating when I say it was another world. I realized, gosh, I'm poor. I don't have anything and I'm going to have to really work here. These students, my peers, their education is even better than the high school education that I had. So, it was a real eye opener and I threw myself into that consciously, not really understanding all of the repercussions, but it was a decision I made and that was a big one.
Wow. So as you moved into this world and you were successful, how did this experience shape your belief in what was possible for you and what came next?
Yeah. What it helped me understand was that I could not get in my head about what I didn't have, because that would have created a major distraction. It would have created doubt in my capabilities to move forward, to pass my courses, to graduate. And so what I did effectively was sort of put all of that to the side. I understood that I would never go to spring break. And I lamented about it for probably a week or 2. And then I got over it. And then when I was a sophomore, a junior, a senior, I didn't even think about that I couldn't go to spring break.
Uh,
And, so there were certain realities that I accepted as realities, and I did not let them distract me from what the goal was. I had my eye on the prize, and the prize was that I wanted to get a bachelor's degree. And that's what I did.
You finished up your bachelor's degree. You went on to reinvent yourself, not only professionally, but geographically, moving from America, where you speak English, to Austria, where people speak
Sure.
German. And then you thrived there. And that had to be such a major change, maybe as much, if not more, than going from Bronx to a private school. What inner belief helped you embrace so much change and keep evolving?
I had an inner belief that as long as I could connect with people, as long as I could find my community, my people, because I was in a foreign country, I knew if I could just make one friend, that this would be a portal into a larger world for me. And I had this inner belief that I would make a friend, that I would meet somebody. I mean, I was literally dumped into a city, which back in 1999, no one spoke English here. Now, if you would come here, it's very easy. Everybody speaks English because they learned it on social media, etc.
Mm.
But back then, it was really difficult to find people in my age group when I moved here who spoke English. And that's what I did. I made a plan. I said, I'm going to make a friend and I'm going to get a job. I don't care which job it is, but I'm going to get a job. And I knew from myself that if I could just accomplish those two things, maybe the bar was set low. People will say, well, that's not such an ambitious bar. But for me, that was a very important bar. You cannot underestimate what it means to move to a foreign country. And from that point, my world opened up. And one friend turned into two, and then two turned into being part of a women's network and having a role, as a leading position in this women's network and joining the American women abroad and so on and so forth. And that is how things really started to happen for me, because what I understand is that my life's journey could not happen with me just navigating my life alone. I needed other people with me. And so I had to find those people.
Is so important, and especially for what you do now, because now you help high performing women align with their values and lead boldly. So, what's a common blind spot that you see ambitious women trying to do to expand their influence or impact?
One of the biggest blind spots I see with my clients is the belief that if they work hard, people will notice. And there is nothing that can be further from the truth. So they are, and of course I hate to generalize, but they are driven by perfectionism. And I think we all understand that perfectionism can undo you. And then the idea that if I just put all of the work in, I put all of my energy, I'm going to deliver 100% plus, people will magically notice what I'm doing. But the fact of the matter is, while they're grinding, while they're working really hard, their colleagues are playing golf with the boss, having a coffee break with this person, going to industry events, and so on and so forth. And they're missing out on this critical relationship building, which is so essential for every career. And of course, there's a lot of resistance to that because sometimes the women think that networking is unsavory. And it's like, that's a sleazy thing. I don't want to network because then people think I want something from them. But networking is a two-way street, right? It's not that you're just taking things from people. You also are delivering some value as well. And so we have to overcome some of those hurdles to sort of get them to overcome the notion that networking is not necessary and hard work is enough.
I love that you're talking about this. So when you are working with the women and they're feeling like, oh, it's so unsavory, how do you get them to change that mindset and get stuck from that particular thought?
Small wins. Everything is baby steps. If you've never networked, if you have a bad feeling about meeting people and putting yourself out there, I cannot flip them from one day to the next. And so the point is to get strategic about where are the places that you need to show up? Where are the places where the people that you need to be around are located? And let's start to strategize some very easy ways that you can start to show up and become visible. And sometimes that might mean volunteering for a stretch project because you know that the sponsor of that project is someone who's important for your career, right? Because then you will be able to work closely with them under normal circumstances. You wouldn't be able to do that. And these are the kinds of things that I try to help them strategize. So it's not me saying, "Hey, you have to network and, go do it." It's what are the things you feel most comfortable doing? What is a low-hanging fruit? Let's try that first. And once they start to get some results, then they're open to trying other things. And then it really starts to become part of their DNA that they understand, yes, when that industry event is happening, I do need to show up and not only show up and be a wallflower, but I have to show up and I have to talk to some people. I have to set some targets for myself and how many people I'm meeting a day. And I know it sounds really crazy, but I do it myself. When I go to a networking event, I always say, I will be satisfied if I walk out of here having had two meaningful conversations with people. I don't need more than that, just two, because I want to listen to the person. I want to understand what they're doing, understand how I might be able to help them, right? Not that they help me. And that's how it starts. And then you exchange LinkedIn handles and you start following the person, you start liking what they're doing on social media. And eventually you start to know, like, and trust, and that starts to build slowly.
I imagine that having you as a coach and an accountability partner and someone to kind of bounce I'm worried about this, I'm thinking about that really makes a difference. Can you tell us a story about one of the breakthroughs your clients had who maybe had that mindset that, wait, people should just notice my work?
Yeah. I have a number of stories, but the one that immediately comes to mind is I've been working for a few months with a woman who works for a very large concern. And 250,000 employees. So we're talking, really big operation. And she started to have a feeling like she wanted to look for work or just try to explore the possibilities. And she says, but nobody knows I exist. No headhunters are coming to me. And I said, well, let's look at your LinkedIn profile and see what you're doing there. And she had a profile, but she was a lurker. She wasn't doing anything. And she was really uncomfortable about being on the platform because she was worried about being judged by her colleagues. And we created a plan together. I said, let's take some baby steps. What are the things that you want to talk about? What are the things that when someone says your name that you want to be known for? Because you can't, if you're talking about everything, you're talking to no one. So she
Uh-huh.
zoned in on three topics that she felt comfortable talking about. She created a plan where she would post once a week. Now she's
Uh-huh.
posting twice a week, but she started small. And then she was absolutely astonished by the sort of reaction. She had some unrealistic expectations. She thought once she posted once or twice that everybody would be liking her post and they would somehow be going viral. So we had to reset those expectations. But the real breakthrough for her was when one of the large executives commented on one of her posts. And she said, I can't believe this person saw me. And I said, yeah, they saw you. And what does it mean? They saw you, you're on their radar screen. Now this gives you a reason to reply. This gives you a reason now to follow them and see what they're doing on LinkedIn. This gives you a reason when you see them in a corridor to say, hey, thank you for liking my post, and maybe striking up a conversation with them. And so it seems like a very simple sort of thing, but this was a real breakthrough for someone who was completely resistant to using social media to create visibility for herself.
I love it. So, one of the most vulnerable and relatable parts of your story is how you've balanced caregiving and leadership. So, what did that season of having to balance both caregiving and leadership teach you about power, priorities, and defining success?
One of the first things that it taught me is that being vulnerable in the workplace, it doesn't harm you. It doesn't harm you. And so I told my boss, and just for a little bit of context, I had a disabled mother. My mother became disabled, and I became her primary caregiver while I was raising my child and while I was working. So I had my hands full. And the first thing I did, well, maybe it wasn't the first thing, but one of the first things I did was to tell my boss what was going on. I told my team because I wanted everyone to understand I'm going through a very difficult time and I'm not going to deliver any less here, but you need to understand that in the background, there were some things going on in my life and that somehow may shift some of my priorities and some of my availability. So this was one thing. And that's not an easy thing to do because most of us really like to keep our private lives close to our chest and
Mhm.
not talk about what's going on and certainly not be vulnerable and sort of share this kind of details. So that's the first thing that I learned. The second thing that I learned is as a leader, when you lead with humanity, people want you to succeed. And I cannot tell you the amount of support that I got from different people. Just the teams chat pinging me and saying, how's your mom doing, Sharon? You haven't mentioned her in a while. You know how heartwarming that is to just that people would remember that I was going through something so challenging. And so I would say that when you lead with humanity, when you lead with your heart, somehow this is going to come back to you in whatever way, in whatever way. The other thing that it taught me is to ask for help. I will not lie to you, Natalie. The first years of my mother's illness, I tried to juggle all the balls by myself, and I nearly ran myself into the ground. I really and that it was at this point where I was sitting with my husband in a restaurant and crying uncontrollably that I realized that I had to change something. And it was a really scary place to be because I'm a person who likes to be in control. And it also forced me to look back on not leadership just in the context of leading at work, but how I was leading my life, what I was doing in my life. And I had to make some big changes. And one of those changes was asking for help and paying for help and not having shame about using resources because I had somehow created this narrative that I had to do everything myself. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good enough. And there just aren't enough hours in the day to do that kind of thing. And so and I probably could come up with another 10 lessons I learned about leadership because of that. But there's one other thing that I would say is that as a leader, when you are going through a difficult time and you're working for a company that's driving results all the time, you have to show yourself grace. Because if you are not able to show yourself grace, you cannot expect that the others are going to show you grace, and you cannot demand it from others. And that's a real survival skill when you are climbing the ranks of an organization, is to treat yourself well and to also teach people how to treat you.
I think that's very powerful, especially as you said, when organizations are going to be results orientated. How did you go about showing yourself compassion? I imagine part of it was the asking for help. Were there other things that you did to show yourself some compassion in that time?
What I would say is that the word generosity became a very big part of my life. Because what I also understood about the way that I was working was that I kind of was hogging all of the work. I was doing everything. And the generosity came in because I realized I had an extremely competent team. And the generosity was saying, hey guys, why don't you take this as a stretch project? It's something that I normally do myself, but you do it. You will learn from it. I will accompany you on the way. I will coach you. I will hold your hand so that you can get it done. What it did was it freed me up. And so this generosity was about looking at everything that was on my plate and saying, what can I do here to help my team grow? Because this is not just about me. And taking the bits and pieces that I had already learned from, I could probably do with my hand tied behind my back, and giving them as opportunities to those in my team so that they could have visibility, so that they could go to meetings and meet people that they normally would not be able to come in contact with. And this freed up an enormous amount of space. Didn't mean that I worked any less, but I just had more space to breathe. And then, of course, what it also created was a bench because my people were getting more and more developed and they were learning more skills and they were becoming more attractive to other departments in the organization, which was great for them. So we all won in this situation. And as a leader, we always have to understand our job is to maximize the growth and development of our team. And sometimes we forget that because we're just working so hard to get things done that we're not thinking about how is getting this done helping this person advance their career. Because that's how you keep the people on your team. It's not holding them frozen in one space because it's comfortable for you, the leader.
That I would think would be such a powerful team. How did your team respond to those stretch goals? Was there anyone that was like, hey, no, no, no? Or, and then you had to coach them through the fear? Or were they all pretty much like, all right, let's go?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're always going to have one or two who just are not interested in doing more work. But what happened in this instance is that they started to understand and see how their colleagues were starting to thrive. And then it made it easier for them to come and say, I think I'm ready for this now. And so, I don't want to give the impression that everybody was on board at the same time because they weren't. There were just some that I knew would be on board immediately. And then there were some that took a little bit longer to get there. But eventually we got there with the whole team.
I love that because I feel like as I'm teaching my direct reports, some of the things that I'm doing behind the scenes, letting go of responsibilities opens me up to learn more as well. So I myself grow too. And I see that also coming from your story, but beyond that, it gave you the bandwidth to take care of the things that you needed to take care of.
Absolutely.
So from New York to Vienna, your journey shows how networks and community can elevate growth. It's not only the network of finding other people to incorporate with, but also the network to grow your own people and have them grow their network. Who are the people, mentor, peers, and sponsors that helped you break glass ceilings or ceilings along the way?
I was very fortunate to have a few people in my life who were either mentors or sponsors. And I always like to make the distinction between the two. The mentor, in my view, is the person who is giving you advice, telling you what their lived experience was with a similar challenge that you have, and then you're taking bits and pieces of that and trying to run with it. Or sometimes your mentors are even telling you what to do. The sponsor, on the other hand, is the person who's talking about you when you're not in the room. The person who's saying, you know what, Sharon would be great for this new assignment. I think that she's the right person. And so I was lucky enough to have some of these kinds of folks in my life. One of them was a woman who said to me once, and she was very brutal, and she said to me, I don't know what you're doing with your career, Sharon. She says, you're working from the home office because, in the tech, I worked in tech for a long time. In tech, we had home office 20 years ago.
Mhm.
Everybody else just started to get it the last 5 years or so. And she said, you work from home a lot. We don't see you in the office that often. And I want to understand, is this a job for you or is this a career? And she said it just like that.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was a bit taken back and a little bit insulted, I have to say. But I reflected on what she said. And I thought, you know what? She's right. She's right because I want this to be my career and I need to show up. I sort of got into a rut, and she really helped pull me out of that with this statement of hers. And after that, my mindset shifted. The way I showed up shifted. Everything shifted in my mind. And it was just like flipping a switch. I've also had a sponsor, a person who's much older than me, who has a very, very deep network, who was putting me in spaces so that I could meet people, inviting me places and saying, Sharon, this is happening. Why don't you come along? You
Mhm.
might meet some people. And it was such a wonderful opportunity. It was also a huge act of generosity to do that. And because of that, and because of those introductions, I found business opportunities. I met new contacts. I mean, it's just amazing what a sponsor can do for you. And so I always try to encourage my coaching clients to work on getting a mentor. That's easy. It's
Mhm.
easy to get a mentor because when you work in a structured environment, many of them have mentoring programs where they pair you with people, but you can also go into your community. I like to call it a board of directors. Who is the board of directors of your career? Who are the few people that you always tap into for information, for advice, for guidance? All of us need to have a board, right?
Mhm.
And they might be people who work in our institution or people outside. And this is really important. The sponsors will only come when people really start to trust you because I'm not going to mention your name in a closed meeting if I don't trust that you are really going to deliver the goods. So that's a longer game. It takes longer to build relationships and have people sponsor you. But if you know that's what you want and you already have a relationship with someone where you could imagine it could develop in that direction, use your words. Say, I think you would be a great sponsor for me. How do you feel about that? Could you imagine endorsing me for a project a year down the road? And if they say no, say, well, what do I need? Is there a skill that I'm missing that you think I need or some sort of experience? And let them tell you.
Hmm.
Because if they don't tell you, you'll never know, right?
Right. And we sort of touched on this, but maybe you can go a little deeper. What advice do you have for women who are afraid to reach out to people they admire or and find it super intimidating?
Yeah, it is intimidating. It absolutely can be intimidating. But there are a couple of things that you can do. So first off, social media is a good way to start. For people who are professional women, I think LinkedIn is probably the best platform to use for this, where you can start to connect with people. It's a very low risk way of connecting,
Uh-huh.
sending someone a connection request and writing a note and saying, you probably don't know me, but I work in this department, or you probably don't know me, but you and I work in this industry and I've been following you online and I would love for you to appear in my feed more often. Do you mind if we connect with one another? And it's a really low
Uh-huh.
risk way because if you get the rejection, what is the rejection? They just will ignore you, right? And
Yeah.
you move on and you
And
move
who
on.
knows? They probably didn't get the message. So you never know if they rejected you.
Exactly, exactly. So that is a real low risk way to do it. And then, fear is real when it comes to getting the courage to speak to people. And sometimes when you see someone in a group, if there are three people talking and one of them is the one you want to know, join the group. No one will ever turn you down if you say, hey, do you mind if I join your conversation? No one's ever going to kick you out of that circle, right? Because if it's really truly a private conversation, they probably would be doing it someplace else. You do have to put yourself out there. You do have to be a little bit bold. No one is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I want to know you, right? Oh,
Right.
maybe they will, but it does require being intentional and having a strategy about how you're going to be intentional.
Yep. And your palms may sweat, and that's a good thing because now you're
Yeah.
doing your job in stretching.
Yeah.
People may want to get a hold of you. I'm hoping that they do to start to develop this whole strategy of networking. What's the best way to find you?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is livingwhileleading.com. It has all of my contact details, and I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well. So you can always send me a direct message or a connection request or follow me. Those are the two easiest ways to be in touch with me. I also have a podcast, by the way, which is called Living While Leading. And if one wants to get a little bit more insight to my thinking on different topics that have to do with women in leadership, can certainly tap into those episodes. There are about 72 of them now on
Wow.
all of the major podcast platforms.
And we will have links to all three in the notes. So thank you for that. Now we'll move to the insider core questions. And the first one is, what's a powerful relationship or opportunity you almost walked away from? And how did that decision impact your trajectory?
I was offered a job in another country when my child was young. And for obvious reasons, I said, I'm not going to take that. I need to be home when my kid comes from school. And I spoke to a few mentors, and my mentors advised me to take it because it was a sales role and it was leading a really huge department at the time. I would have been responsible for a budget of $250 million. Back in those days, that was really big money. I would have been leading a huge team. And it was going to be my first opportunity to lead a team since I had moved to Europe because I had been a manager and a leader when I was in the United States, but it was my first opportunity in Europe. And I took the position.
Hmm.
I took it because it was the next country. It's Slovakia. So it's
Oh,
not that far from Austria. So I was commuting there a few days a week. I was able to do home office
mhm.
once a week. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made because being a sales leader, having direct responsibility for developing a team, hiring a team, delivering a budget, delivering a forecast, these were all skills that some of them I had, obviously, but I didn't have them in IT. And it just really put me in a position to learn and grow at almost, hyper speed because, it was such a fast moving business. I had to learn everything very, very quickly. And I almost let the door close on that one.
I could see why you would have said no. It shows me how much you trust your gut, because you had a lot of opportunities to say no, but you took the hard road.
I
Can
did.
you share a moment in corporate leadership when you had to make a difficult political decision and what taught you how to play the long game here?
I was in a very difficult situation once where I had a team. This was a team in Bratislava, and every single member of my team had overperformed on their sales targets,
Mm,
meaning that they were just really great at what they did. And we had a policy in the department that the 10% of the employees had to be given a performance rating that was less than optimal.
mm,
And this comes from this old school thinking from Jack Welch, where they call it the rank and yank. And Jack Welch of GE talked about how the bottom 10% of every company needs to be fired. And so this business unit had ascribed to this very perverse action. And so even though I had an entire team who overperformed, I was told that one of them had to be designated an underperformer. And for me, it
mm,
just went against everything that I believed in. And I said, I won't do it. I won't do it. And I fought tooth and nail. I lost the battle. I
mm,
lost the battle. I had to do it. I wish this would have been a story where I could say, this David and Goliath type of thing that I won. I didn't win the battle, and it taught me so many lessons. It taught me lessons about, when you work for big machinery, like huge companies like the ones that I worked for in the past, that as a single person, you have to stand by your convictions. It doesn't mean that you're always going to win, right?
mm,
So I did not capitulate. I mean, eventually my hands were tied and I had to do it. But what I could do is I could sleep at night knowing that I really fought for this employee. Of course, the flip side of that was that I had to have a very difficult conversation with this person and tell them this. And it was horrible. It
mm,
was really horrible. And so, what did it teach me about the long game? The long game for me is that I've always stuck to my values,
mm,
no matter what. My values are not negotiable, and I stuck by my values. I articulated them. I escalated to try to get what I wanted. And I lost, but I could at least stand with my head held up, knowing that I had done everything that I could have possibly have done to try to, knock some common sense into these people. So it's not a pleasant story. It's not a story where I won, but it's a story where I know, it reinforced who I am. I know who I am and
mm.
I know what I stand for.
What happened with that employee in the end? Did they stay or?
They did. They did stay. I mean, they were really battered by it. Their ego was completely shattered, but they stayed. I explained the situation. I was very transparent. I told them what was at stake, why it happened, why they were the one that was chosen. So I gave them all of the information because when you have these difficult situations like this, the more information that you're allowed to reveal so that the person understands the circumstances, the easier it is for them, maybe not to accept it, but to sort of digest and understand what sort of processes were behind it and how it was not about them and it was
Mm,
about the system that was bigger than them.
right. When you moved abroad, what did you have to unlearn about leadership in order to succeed in a new culture?
Well, when you're in the United States, we all speak the same language. We all culturally are aligned with one another, no matter where we come from, no matter where our forefathers come from. We are culturally aligned. And you cannot underestimate how easy cultural alignment makes it to go through your daily life when you're working on a large organization. And I just sort of thought that when I started my career eventually at IBM in Austria, that I would just simply, come in there as the American woman and everybody would like me because I was competent and everybody would accept me. But it didn't work like that. So what I understood to be true in my past life was absolutely not the case. I had to really understand the cultures, the norms of all of the people I was working with, communication preferences, how I should write emails to them, how I should speak to them. And I was working in a huge territory with a lot of countries. And so, what it taught me is that you, as the foreigner, have to go the extra mile to try to understand people and to try to meet them where they are in order to get them to like you, to know you, to trust you, and to collaborate with you in a very effective way.
Right. Wow, that's pretty powerful. My last question is, what does scaling impact look like for you now at this stage of your life and career?
Yeah. Scaling impact. When I coach somebody one on one, I love this experience. And I've always thought to myself, this would be so great if I could amplify this, if I could meet more women, talk to more women. And so, how I decided to scale it was create the podcast because I
Mm.
thought, I have ideas. I have thoughts on how things are. They're my thoughts. Doesn't say that they're the right thoughts, but they are my ideas. And so creating the podcast was one of the ways that I thought that I could scale a bit, scale my message, amplify my voice, get it out there for women to listen to. For a year, I had LinkedIn Lives where I was interviewing top executive women, talking about their challenges as leading as a woman, and they would answer questions in the chat. That was a test that I did. In the end, I decided to abandon it because it was very administrative heavy and I didn't think that it was bringing me the impact. The other thing that I've done is I've started to deliver workshops as well.
Mm.
I do them online and I do them face to face. And by definition, I have more people in the room listening to me and I'm able to scale my impact. And it just makes things a lot easier for me too, because I don't have to have as many different touch points. I can go one place and I can talk to 35 people at a time as opposed to having 35 separate one-on-one meetings with
Yes.
people.
Gotcha. Great. Well, I appreciate you coming on to Unsealing You, adding all the value and making sure that people understand the importance of networking and finding your mentor and your sponsor. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you for inviting me, Natalie.
You're hitting every target and still feel invisible at work. Let's fix that without bragging or burning out. I'm Dr. Natalie Luke. I coach high performers who do everything right but stay unseen. And here's your 7-day visibility play that can change all that. Day 1, audit where you hide. Notice the meetings, the projects, and the updates where you stay silent. Day 2, clarify your story. Write one sentence that links your daily work to the company impact. Day 3, reintroduce yourself. Use power language like I lead instead of I help. Day 4, ask for micro visibility. Volunteer to share results in a stand-up or send a recap email. Day 5, rehearse recognition. Practice accepting credit without deflecting it. Day 6, stretch your circle. Message one potential sponsor and offer value on a project. Day 7, anchor calm confidence. Visibility isn't vanity, it's strategy. Own your presence. Start today with Day 1. Where are you hiding your brilliance? Comment visible and I'll send you the checklist. And remember, calm confidence builds real influence.